Hello and welcome to this video tutorial series, Getting Started with Gluware. If you're taking the test drive, you'll be able to follow along using the instance set up for you. If you're interested in taking the test drive, go to gluware.com/test-drive. Here in part 4 of using Device Manager, we're going to cover using API integrations, including the Cisco Support API and the NIST National Vulnerability Database for security advisories. So let's sign into the Gluware instance and get started. As I sign into the Gluware instance here, I am navigated into the Device Manager application. That's because it's the last application I was in before I either signed out or got timed out. You can navigate using the left-hand menu to view the applications. For this particular demonstration, we're going to look at API integrations which do require setup. If you're a test drive user, they will already be set up for you. To access the setup or to be aware of how they're configured, we go into Settings. This is done on a per org basis. And just to recap, you select your org or your tenant from the org drop down here. And I'm using test-drive-pod 1. And so for my organization, I'm going to go into Settings at the org level and navigate to the integrations. And here you're going to see several of our third-party integrations, 2 of which we're going to be using for this demonstration. The first is Cisco API. Cisco provides API access for customers that have an active SmartNet contract, and to then get access to the APIs, you must request it and be given tokens. So for Cisco, you have to go to apicouncil.cisco.com and request your API tokens there. Once you have your API tokens, and this won't work without that, you enable the Cisco API, you paste in your client ID, and you paste in your API token, and then I do highly recommend you leverage the test button to go ahead and click a test and let it execute a test to ensure you can successfully connect out to the Cisco Support API. If it doesn't successfully connect, either you don't have proper credentials or you need to talk to your IT staff about the Gluware system making outbound API calls. The second integration we're going to look at is NIST, who provides the National Vulnerability Database. And through that National Vulnerability Database, they provide quite a few networking vendors, and they document common vulnerabilities and exposures called CVEs. For NIST, you do need to enable the API. It does not require an API key, but if you do get an API key by going to nvd.nist.gov and then requesting an API key, it will dramatically improve your performance. You'll go from 10 requests allowed per minute to 100 requests per minute. So again, if you're leveraging that API call for a fairly large network of devices, you're going to want the better performance, and then you can test your API connectivity. The last option you see here, I do recommend turning on, which is turning on a schedule. When you turn on a schedule, Gluware will automatically update the support information, making those API calls on your behalf and updating the data in your system. Every one day at any given time, it'll go off and do those API calls. Again, the larger network you have, the more important it is to do something like that, because when you execute an API call on demand, if you have a large network, it could take a while to complete. Cisco implements API rate limiting, and the maximums are different across the different API calls. Sometimes, while Gluware will manage that for you and execute the calls to completion, it may take a while to complete. And similarly for NIST, if you are not leveraging a key and you are doing limited to 10 per minute, then obviously it could take that amount of time to complete. One thing to note though is that Gluware does take your inventory and do a post-processing to consolidate. So we're not doing a call or a request per device. We will consolidate to the device families and operating systems to minimize the API calls required. So with these things set up, if you've made changes in this dialog to turn these things on, make sure you hit save. Okay, so that's all it takes in the setup. So let's navigate back into Device Manager. Here we are in Device Manager. The next thing to do to see the results of the call is that from the cog or the settings here of your grid, you want to ensure that the data is turned on, the fields or columns are turned on so you can see the data coming back. So starting here at contract for Cisco, contract end, end of life, end of sale, critical advisories, product, medium, high, and critical, medium, and highs are going to be common across Cisco and NIST. So those are the advisories. And then the additional content for Cisco, like end of support, end of maintenance, end of sale, and we will leave it there. So you want to make sure all of those are turned on when you're leveraging this API information. So I already showed you one of the two ways to update or get this support data is to, in your settings, schedule it to execute once a day. Another way to do it is you can select one or more devices in your grid, and I'll do Control A to select all, and you can execute the update manually right here from your actions bar to update support data. So I'll go ahead and execute the update, and Gluware is just telling us that we're going to take data about these devices and go and collect information from a third party, hit confirm. And it will take a little, maybe a minute or two, depending on the size of your network, could take much longer. It will go off and collect that data. Okay, so now that that has completed, my data has been updated, and if I scroll to the right in my grid here, I can see, if I look at starting at contract, I can see contract end of life, critical, product ID. I can see all of these components, and I can see all of the counts of the various advisories. And the ones I'd be most concerned with are in the critical category, and then obviously down into medium and high. But I can scroll across and see all the other various data. If I get an NA or a blank, it just means that there is no data, the data is not available. So let's take a deeper dive in, and we're going to look at this physical Cisco switch, since the other ones are virtual device and may have less information. So from the top view, once you've opened up the detailed view of your device, you're going to want to use the views across the top, and we're going to start with this particular one, which is end of life, end of sale. So as I click into this, I can view if any end of life, end of sale has been issued on it, and it would populate here what information is available. One of the things that is interesting about when you're working with physical layer devices is that we also are collecting the data on the components. So the power supply and this particular switch itself have gone end of life. And so I see the end of life bulletins here. Here was the announcement. Here was end of sale. So this is pretty critical. If I have this device in my inventory, I understand they aren't selling it anymore. But if it goes end of life, like life cycle development in 2026, that means they're not supporting this product anymore at all. And so if I'm planning a refresh with my networking equipment, I want to be well aware of the dates as it goes end of support. So moving on, let's look at the support data here, the SmartNet details. This particular switch is not under a SmartNet contract, so I don't have any contract details. I do have a service number and a warranty expiration. However, I'm not under SmartNet contract. So if I needed support on this device or needed software updates, I may have to revisit that and sort that out with Cisco in terms of getting this device on a SmartNet contract. Last and probably most important is clicking on the advisory summary or the advisories. So Cisco issues what they call PCERTs, which are their security advisories. And here I can see that there are criticals, highs, and if I scroll down, mediums as well. So when you have advisories issued, best practice is to kind of perform a scrub. You want to look at each advisory and understand how it may affect you and your network. As you look at the criticals about netconf, restconf, if I'm not using netconf or restconf at all, if I can turn off exposure to it, there might be a workaround. And so basically I have to go through each vulnerability, starting with the most serious from a criticality standpoint, and figure out what I need to do. So what you can do is you can double click in to any one of these vulnerabilities and see the summary provided by Cisco and click in for more information and understand what workarounds or what other things are recommended. Best practice is to perform a scrub, understand your impact or assessment, and then think about or figure out what you need to do. You may need to do nothing if it doesn't affect you. You may need to plan a hardware refresh at some point. You may need to plan a software upgrade, which is a common path to eliminate summaries or advisories that you're affected by. There can also be configuration workarounds. There could be things that you could disable in the configuration or workarounds you could configure, like an access list or more security to prevent the type of exposure. So just back to the advisory summary, just very important that you're aware of the advisors that have been issued. You understand the impact they could have to your network if you're using these things, and understand the risk and have a plan to deal with that. That's really the course of action there. So let's talk briefly about NIST as well, and I'll navigate into this Juniper device. So the Juniper device does have a number of items as well, from critical and high and medium. And just to note on that is that if for some reason there were 0 vulnerabilities, you would not have this view. As long as there are advisories that populate the view, then this view, the advisory summary, becomes available. And then the course of action is really the same as you would do with the Cisco's, is that you want to scrub this list, click in, understand the impact that it may have, understand if it impacts your network, and then determine if there's a course of action to implement an operating system upgrade, a config workaround, or possibly disabling or configuring whatever the workaround might be. And you want to essentially scrub that and ensure you've minimized your exposure to the issues of the varying severity. With that, this concludes this integration of both Cisco Support API and NIST National Vulnerability Database. This also concludes this segment. Look forward to progressing your getting started with Gluware with the next set of applications. Thank you.